So I want to talk about 3 aspects of blind spots. First of all, what are they? So, and when I say what are they, I mean not so much defining them, but I want to take like 30 seconds. I'm going to do a Mr. Rogers. So for the next 30 seconds, I want you to just close your eyes and contemplate and name some of your own blind spots. So on your mark, get set, go. Time's up. Open your eyes. So one of the things about blind spots is that they tend to be challenging. So for another little bit, maybe just close your eyes and see whatever it is you might notice physically going on in your body as you try to recall these very specifically to mind. Okay. Does anybody have anything they want to share about that? That's pretty risky, but we're friends. Anybody want to say anything about either what they saw, maybe share a blind spot? Yes, Kosen, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, one thing I noticed is that I don't like my blind spots. And in my body, I notice tension in different kinds of ways. But, you know, trying to connect with my blind spots, I feel myself going like, oh.
Raise your hand if you can identify with that. Okay, so I want to talk about what are blind spots. And then how does a blind person see them? And then most importantly, how do we take care of them? So thank you for offering that excellent example of blind spots for us. So first of all, I want to share some stories about blind spots from my own practice. One of my favorites and the one that I have the most fun with is something I call looking for Coco, which I was doing one day at the Great Vow Monastery where I spent 3 years. And I was in the kitchen making brownies and I ran out of cocoa. And we had a small near pantry, and then we had a pantry that was across the hall, required, you know, a little bit more traveling. And I was directed to go to the large one because we'd run out of some in the pantry. So I went in, and it wasn't a very big space. It's like a sort of a walk-in closet is what it feels like, and looked everywhere, all the shelves, and came out and said to the Tenzo, I can't find any cocoa. And she just looked at me with a certain amount of frustration and pity. She said, okay, I'll go with you. And she took me back into that walk-in closet. And on the left, occupying an entire shelf, was a 50-pound bag that said on the front of it, Coco. So that was a very beautiful teaching for me. I thought, well, this is exactly the Dharma. I'm looking for frantically for it so that I can make a wonderful treat for the world of the monastery. And because I didn't even know that I had a picture in my head of basically sort of a large size Hershey's can. So I just couldn't see it, even though it was so clearly there. And it makes me laugh because it's like, well, what do you do? Right? What do you do? So we'll talk a little bit later about how to take care of those blind spots. But let me then share another blind spot that I discovered really kind of close by. Many of you may have seen a story that was in the New York Times about the Minnesota Department of Health basically effort to go out into the rural community and to make more connections and get more information about how COVID was seen, being spread, etc. And what happened in this case is they arrived in Eitzen, and according to the story, they were greeted very hostilely. And they were treated so hostilely, and they were so there were a number of people of color. I think for sure there was a person of Latin ethnicity who basically was verbally roughed up. And the story in the New York Times basically pointed to, of course, the town saying, you got it all wrong. The people that, this was just unfamiliarity. Some of the facts that you're reporting simply aren't true. There weren't damaging or harming statements to anybody on the team. And I talked about it with the one or two people that I know and felt like I could initiate a conversation with here in New Albany. And I suddenly realized somewhere near the closing of the conversation that all of the conversation was about understanding the position that the people in Eitzen were in, that they came in a car that had California plates. They hadn't heard anything about it, but there was absolutely no conversation initiated by me or the other person about how that was for the people that came of all colors. And the state of Minnesota, it was reported, I think not solely because of this incident, but more others like it, just decided to close down the project. And so for me, it was a blind spot to really see that I was thinking I had my, the Snow Queen, or what I'm blocking on her name, but Snow White's nemesis. I had that mirror up, and I was looking in it in the same way that queen was, where it was a mirror, but essentially I was using the reflection of it to try to manipulate my self-image. And I saw that happening with people that I was having a conversation with. And suddenly I just felt incredible sadness. And even now it affects me to realize that for the people that came and were doing the surveys, they were invisible. I'm sure that they heard about this in many ways. And of course, it became very public. If it was in the New York Times, people were talking about it. And they didn't make it into the conversation of the people of the town or around the town. And it really was an awakening for me about how me first that was, how just, and how much loss there was in not really being able to connect with those people, even though I have a very sincere intention to be kind and be supportive and help people and connect with people. It's something I need and I'm devoted to, but this is a serious thing. It's it just sort of all of a sudden just flooded in. And I've been dealing with it really ever since in some way or another, some not necessarily very healthy or helpful. And then the third, I guess, thing to just recognize, and especially in Buddhism, is what I think to myself of as the big blind spot. So the big blind spot is impermanence is not causing suffering. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be in things that are, well, we want things to be impermanent when they're not, or we want them to be permanent when they're impermanent. So I didn't say that very well, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Basically, it's impermanence doesn't have to be a problem. It's only a problem when we want it not, we don't want it. And then, of course, there is the teaching of non-self, where nothing is separate, nothing is impermanent, and yet we see ourselves as separate beings who are not constituted of things that are constantly impermanent. And then, of course, the aspect of no birth, no death, so that the Heart Sutra teaching is one that says, if you look deeply, you will see that there is no substance to you or anything else, and it's all connected and it's all dependent. It's all one big dynamic functioning, and everything's included, whether we like it or not. So even though we are Buddhists and we study and we meditate and we try to be mindful and practice the Eightfold Path, this is just not with us every part of our day. So this came up for me as a topic because I realized how adverse probably almost all of us are to our blind spots. That's why they're blind. Our anxiety has, is hiding in the cracks of our unconsciousness, and it makes it very hard to see. And we're not all that enthusiastic about pulling it out. Our anxiety, really, that arises from the way we see the world, is hiding in our unconsciousness, and it manifests in our habits. So that gets me to the next section. How does a blind person see? So it's interesting. I don't drive that much, but when I do, it's usually for long periods of time. So almost always, I'm more aware of my blind spots because I'm driving, and I try to remember not to endanger other people by not checking to the side of me, particularly when I'm traveling at high speeds. So that's become an interesting place for my mindfulness and investigation to go when I'm driving. And so sometimes things are pointed out as dangerous, like watch for this, don't forget this. So sometimes there's like a collective wisdom that helps us see something. But we have very strong ability to create concepts and beliefs that substitute themselves for wisdom. A sure way to get help with blind spots is to ask others for feedback. Now, guaranteed, like probably the best source of feedback would be your family members. Because they're not blind to our blind spots. They've got, although in families it can be a little tough because sometimes we all kind of hang out in the same belief system and looking at the world. So, but if you, and I learned this in part from a guy in corporate America that I work with, and I hardly ever saw him when he didn't say, well, do you have any feedback for me? And he actually listened to it. Now, he had a bit of a temper, but he didn't usually get angry at the person. But, you know, sometimes he would extract retribution if he really didn't like it. But I thought to myself, what a proactive way to invite in that information, because somebody else will spot it. And sometimes they'll volunteer it, which usually means that one is going to be adverse. If you ask for it, then you retain the possibility of the illusion of control. But it also means that you're in a different relationship. We are in a different relationship when it's like science. It's like when we put on our curiosity hat and say, well, let's look into this, then we find all kinds of things and we have all kinds of reaction, but it's very alive. And when we're really deeply into curiosity, we have fun. That's what play is about a lot of times. We can certainly pay attention to criticisms. We can pay attention to criticisms that we have either inaudibly or audibly about situations and people, but certainly for things that we're hearing from our inner critics or from people around us, or, you know, in a professional or a friend environment, we will sometimes be criticized. And those really are great opportunities to see through into our blind spots. And seeing through into those blind spots is really the only way that we can take care of them. We have to first be able to see them. So if they are invisible, like the medical workers in the story about Aizen, then we don't have really a prayer, and it really creates all kinds of anxiety. And the body actually is an excellent barometer. I have found in my own experience that bodies don't actually know how to lie, but sometimes they can be diverted. So the mind on his deathbed, the Buddha said, the mind is very tricky. Watch it very carefully, because it will get us into trouble with our blind spots, and it will take a tremendous toll on the body, which is why it's so trustworthy as a source of information. And we can take a moment, like we did at the beginning, to say, well, what are my blind spots? Because we all sort of have this kind of, well, of course I have blind spots. Everybody has blind spots. But when we start naming them, we may find that we're not too sure, or if we do see a blind spot, we kind of will oftentimes have a relieving story about it. So it's like, well, everybody, nobody's perfect, right? And even though that's true, it's kind of a palliative. So it's like those tests where they give half the people to something that will really introduce a difference, and half the people get a placebo. So the placebo effect is something that we can invoke. And we've learned scientifically that our minds actually really do create like a little picture of a self. And it's constantly taking in information to protect and or change that image based on neurological responses. So we can, in our own way, when we're feeling rested and willing, we can note our own worst fears. So I think it's Buddhism, like everything, it has, I think, 5 main fears. I'll see if I can remember them. Public speaking is, I think, the one that's at the top of the ladder of anxiety producing. Losing your job. Let's see, going crazy. Does anybody else have any to offer? Probably losing your family members or people that you love. And I can't remember which one. I used to always leave out going crazy. And that's what told me that that was one of my biggest fears. And now that I'm 70, I'm sure it's going to happen. And it's not so funny when you're going through it. The other thing to look at is our deepest beliefs. So I think the COVID virus has really given us all a lesson in how much our belief systems are in place to protect us from reality and to soothe our anxieties. I've read a couple of stories post the Capitol riot where there was a man who had been a Democrat and a liberal and a Christian, a very lovable family man, but with the isolation due to COVID, he spent way more time on Facebook than he ever had. And his pastor talked with him and his wife talked to him, and he knew for himself that it wasn't healthy what was happening. But essentially, he took it in so much that he became enraged and participated in the Capitol riots. And that unearthed this whole set of conditions that he's still grappling with, at least according to the story, and his family is grappling with. It's like his response was something that was a deep shock for him and for his family members. So he had some consciousness as he was going along, but he really had a hard time holding that and not acting. And on the other side of the coin, there was a woman that became a member of QAnon, kind of lived and breathed it. And then apparently there was an idea that someday in March was when the real, the real president that had been elected was going to be inaugurated. And when that was a non-event, something broke. And she began seeing and testing, and is now a supporter in the social networking world of other QAnon females in particular, who consult her to say, so really, it's not real? And we say, I'm sure to ourselves, how could that happen? I mean, how many times have we asked, it's like, how can that happen? But these were both people that were also self-aware and also struggled about, well, how did this happen? And we probably all had times when we find ourselves blurting out something, or we just lose it. And we may say, well, I didn't have enough rest, or I had a lot of things happening. But there's a lot of that kind of noticing going on because of COVID. And it's on both sides of the good-bad spectrum. So essentially, like Kosen said, it feels extremely uncomfortable. There's a physical resistance to inviting these things in. And yet, if we open to them, which we really can only do with mindfulness, we have to be probably first willing to see. So really that's what the first factor of enlightenment, which is mindfulness, has to offer, is a gateway to unimaginable, unthinkable liberation, calm, sufficiency, joy, and equanimity, because the universe includes things we're going to like and not like. And it won't matter if we're Buddhas. We'll still have things we like and that we don't like. We just don't have to let them direct how we'll respond. We just can observe them. But I don't know about you. I get tired of practicing sometimes. It's like, I don't want to. Now, that is a sure indicator that there's a blind spot and some anxiety in there someplace. It's just, okay. So that's when I go out and buy potato chips and licorice, red licorice. And sometimes it takes me, I don't know, a couple of packages of red licorice before I'm ready to go back to work. So I've touched a little bit on taking care of blind spots. So one of the things that's true also is blind spots aren't always bad. One of the blind spots that I've discovered, I actually happened on when I was preparing this talk, when I was coming back on Thursday from my second vaccination. And a lot of times when I drive, I consider it both a good practice, but also a genuine gift to the driving population that I not listen to anything on the radio. And so, but then after the shot, there was a certain amount of, I don't know, it got all kinds of things moving. It's like, yay, what's going on? And, but I still had the day to live through and nobody to celebrate it with. And so I turned on the radio and I got Wisconsin Public Radio. And who should appear but somebody named Judd Brewer was talking on a morning show about anxiety. And he's a doctor of neurology who's focused on habit patterns and anxiety. And it sounded like this was a student of Buddhism, which after I Googled a few things, I've got some strong evidence that suggests that indeed he's very familiar with Buddhist teachings. But he's got 5-minute videos on habit formation and but mostly making friends with and playing with your habits. And he's seen loads of, he's got a clinic. He's the head of a center for mindfulness at the place that he's doing all of his study. He's using MRIs and science and all this kind of good stuff. And I thought, that's one of those things that I used to think was just luck, but actually it's a reflection of my intention. Because that intention energy is out there, things come at the oddest times that are exactly what I need. So I'll share a few of the things that he has to tell us about. So how do we take care of these blind spots? I want to read you a few excerpts from one of my favorite talks from a Katagiri book. The first one, you have to say something, which for somebody that's often criticized for talking too much is my favorite book. And one of my favorite pieces in there is entitled, When You Can't Move an Inch. And the way he opens this, he says, we are all selfish. Now, I love that about Katagiri. I love that he went to a bunch of businessmen and it was supposed to be a fundraiser. And he started out with, we're all going to die. This is the attitude that is modeled. He's my model for what it means to invite my blind spots to manifest. We are all selfish. And I'm just going to jump a little bit. He says, at the same time, we can't get away from it. And we can't say with conviction, I must live with my selfishness. Right? So this is a very familiar quandary. Just substitute whatever word you need for the situation for selfishness. We can't escape it, and we can't stay with it. And then there's this amazing, just joyful sentence. Still, this doesn't mean that we should think we can't be free of selfishness. So my ears perk up every time I read this. When I get discouraged, then I will read this again and again. So he says, let me see. This teaching is about letting us know just what our situation is, how it works, and how we can best deal with this. This is our practice. So this is like right effort in the Eightfold Path. This is like the first noble truth, which is we need to look at great detail at what's actually happening in the moment, while at the same time including in that this mind that's so capable of making up our favorite stories about us and other people in the world. So he goes on. I like this piece. This teaching is about letting us know just what our situation is. So that's a different thing than fixing it or getting rid of it or putting our hands on it and having it forever and being in control of it. It's just knowing it. Just knowing it. That's so powerful. That willingness is something that I've discovered as one of my blind spots in a way, how deep that goes and how many strategies I have and how much in the shadow they are. You know, I really, that mirror on the right side that says, be careful, things aren't as they appear in real life. The distances aren't, aren't accurate. So there's that aspect of blind spots. And the part that always makes me cry, really, I'll try not to do that, and I'll try to keep track of time here. He says, if we are to take care of it, meaning our ideas, our blind spot, in the best way, We have to open our hearts completely to our selfishness. This means that if you see others as your enemy, you have to realize that you are the enemy, not them. You have to realize that as you look at them, so they look at you. You have to let them look at you until you become the object instead of the subject. You have to look at yourself until you see yourself as they do. So how many times have I said, what can I do about this terrible imbalance between a person with a white skin and a person with dark skin? And this paragraph tells me everything I really need to know, but that I'm probably not all that enthusiastic about training in. It's like doing my exercises. I completely believe them. I can collect exercises, you know, and then I'll try them out and they just don't last very long. And when I got sick and I had to do some exercises because I basically couldn't stand up if I didn't. I had some sciatica problems. That's when I learned that aversion was really helpful in developing my discipline. These are good things to know about yourself. Because as soon as those criticisms come up, then we want to run away. Shame comes up, anxiety comes up, and we can feel it in our body. So that's one thing we can do. Follow Katagiri's teaching. And really, we can follow the Buddhist teachings. Everything that we've been studying and practicing is exactly what this is not really a new answer. This is really not something that's a mystery, what we can do about it. It's what we can do about anything that we suffer from. But different forms of suffering, different aspects of suffering, it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of difficult karmic seeds that sprout. And so, weeds spring up. So in my own practice, anyway, I'm very fond of the three tenets. Don't know mind, bearing witness, and appropriate action. And I think it's a Bernie Glassman teaching, or it might have been a Maizumi Roshi teaching, I'm not sure. But those are correlated with the three pure precepts. So don't know mind is correlated with do no harm. And bearing witness is correlated with do everything that's good. This simplistic language, but it's effective. And then the third pure precept is free all beings. And that's correlated with appropriate action. And when a Kyoku, whose last name I'm forgetting, but she's the head of the LA Center and a student of Bernie Glassman's, came to help Clouds and Water when we had a breach of ethics by our first teacher, and the whole Sangha just kind of lost it in a way. She said, if you find yourself trying to figure out what to do, what is an appropriate action? She said, go back to steps 1 and 2 and let it arise, because it will. Kind of look for it, trust for it. Your body will know, your mind will know the appropriate action. And while it's not, I've had situations where my mind is basically, seems like it's leaving it up to me. It's kind of like, well, you can go either way. You've got options, depends on what choice you want to make. But those three tenets are easy to remember, simple, although not easy to practice. It's like I love the example of a kayak roll. When I was learning about kayaking, I was told that learning a kayak roll was hard to learn, but easy to do. So these tenets are hard to learn, but easy to do when we're willing and when it's clear. And then we have the 7 factors of enlightenment, which we got to study one of the recent winter practice periods. And mindfulness is the first one. Investigation is the second. Energy, effort, diligence, perseverance is the third. Joy, happiness, rapture is the fourth. And those are the kind of energizing factors of enlightenment. And then there are the quieting factors of enlightenment, which are calm or ease, concentration, samadhi, in other words. Although Thich Nhat Hanh cautions us that concentration is only wholesome when you have a wholesome object. And then equanimity, which is, of course, letting go. So that's the classic teaching that we already know. So that's kind of the good news. We've already been training. But then we have this gentleman, Judd Brewer, who, gave a 5-minute TED talk on some of this stuff. And he, interestingly, he talks about habit mapping, and he has a tool that apparently, I haven't found it yet, but it's out on the web so that you can use the same tool that he uses with his clients and students. And very simple. First, be mindful. So if you're doing something like eating potato chips and red licorice in my case, observe the consequences. Especially chicken with the body consequences, but also just what, is it increasing or lowering your anxiety? I mean, just really, and it's very helpful. I did this for a couple of weeks when I was concerned about what I was eating. And this was a similar kind of program. Well, first, just keep being yourself and notice what you notice. And if possible, have fun doing it. I have a goddaughter who came home one day and just in a fit. She tended to be kind of have a fit person, and she had some physical factors that contributed to that. But she said, I don't want to do my homework. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. And so her mother said, okay, well, let's sit down and make a good long list of all the things you hate about your homework. So that would be an example of what this Jed Brewer is suggesting. And I found it's true. If you write it down, it makes a difference. There's something about that, as opposed to just thinking it, because the thoughts can move too quickly in my own experience. And then he says, while you're doing it and you're observing the consequences, also name your inner voices, he says, but he also labels it choice justification. So once you've gone out and bought the potato chips and the red licorice, then you say to yourself all kinds of things, right, to help you quiet the anxiety. Then, and here's the really fun part, repeat the habit, first asking before you go full blown on it, what will I get from this? So that's a different kind of observation. And then he talks about the bigger, better offer. So this is a whole stage where essentially if you're asking yourself, if you're observing basically the consequences, feeling it in your body, watching how you justify it, and asking when you're engaged, consciously having made a choice to engage in something that you know has consequences that you're not that crazy about, or that you are crazy about, I suppose, can work the same way. First asking, what will I get from this? Well, that all by itself moves the needle. And we kind of all know this just because we've been practicing Buddhism, right? But it's so easy to forget. This is impermanent. This is like weeds do spring up. You know, we forget about the weeds spring up part. And the bigger, better offer is something I'm going to have to go read his book about. But I think in my own experience, the way I recognize that is I can ask myself the question, do I want to continue spending my scarce life energy, really helps to get older, in this particular habit? But it takes repetition. It takes repetition and a commitment. And sometimes I'm just not up to it. Actually, probably more times than I'm willing to admit. But nonetheless, my intention is strong and I persist. I persevere. And one of the beauties of the Buddhist practice and approach is that, I guess in summary, knowing our blind spots is not only important to us, but to all the people we're connected to and all the people that contribute to our life. So in other words, it actually makes a difference to the whole universe. The way we see them is first committing to seeing them, inviting them to lunch, like Mara was invited by Buddha. And then to take care of our blind spots, we can do good old practice, but it really helps to get quite specific about it, quite consistent about it, and that we can do it with a spirit of invitation. We can even do it in a spirit of playfulness, like my Coco example. So I'll leave it at that. I would have liked to have stopped at a little earlier, but since I didn't.